back that would help with those individuals who are charged with prostitution, but they're really trafficked. At Lily Pad Haven, we actually also work and help survivors get connected to a law firm that help with those charges, help with getting those charges cleared. And for example, in North Carolina, and this is something that may need to be done on the legislation side, but in North Carolina, if an individual have drug charges, which most of the individuals that are linked into human trafficking, sometimes they have to take on the drug charges of their trafficker. And if you have drug charges and you come into a program, you're not eligible for government assistance because you have drug charges. So you can't get food stamps, you can't get other services unless they have children. So a lot of areas there that we could definitely improve on as far as helping victims. But just to piggyback on what has already been said, that vulnerable populations, foster kids, kids coming out of foster care, they're vulnerable. And there's really no discrimination, even though with vulnerable populations. You have people who look just like us, go to work every day and have what appears to have good lives, but there are some vulnerabilities there that someone can feed on and easily be pulled into a trafficking situation. Earlier I mentioned just talking about trafficking in North Carolina. You know, we saw the video, but trafficking here in North Carolina, we're ranking in the top, North Carolina, we're ranking in the top 8 and 10 for the past few years in North Carolina. Charlotte area being #1 in North Carolina, and this area feeds into that. So even here in 2018, there was an incident of labor trafficking right here in Davison, right in your front yards, backyards, right here, labor trafficking. We see a lot of begging rings, a part of that labor trafficking as well, where you see people on the corner but begging for money, but they have to do that in order to have a place to stay at night because they have to meet a quota. In the Charlotte area, there was a big begging ring that was linked to a church. And we had a survivor that had a medical condition, and she called her trafficker, and he said, "Did you meet your quota?" So that's when she went to the hospital and shared what was going on and got connected with law enforcement who was already working working on that begging ring case. But those things are happening right here. And it was events like this bringing awareness and sharing what human trafficking looks like that gave even the victim here in Davison the strength to say, you know, after an incident, getting connected with law enforcement that then did an investigation, and that individual was charged for labor trafficking. So, I mean, we can't stress enough that it is very real and happening right here. So, just any, I don't know if we're ready to open up for questions or talk a little more. I know you mentioned the North Carolina Commission of Human Trafficking. Organizations like Lily Pad, we are part of that. I see that we have Shirley's name here. She is over the task force for Mecklenburg County, and we are part of that task force, and we've had the opportunity to work and help set standards for organizations like myself to, you know, to make sure that we are providing the best services and being trauma informed and helping survivors. So, yeah.
So just right quick, I'm going to go through a couple of the myths versus realities for human trafficking. So one of the myths is that only females are victims and survivors of trafficking, which is obviously not true. Trafficking happens across all genders. A number of your labor trafficking victims are probably male, you know, in the construction, agriculture, things of that nature, landscaping. So I would say a majority of that, of course, we also have our spas that utilize the massage parlors, a lot of that, your nail salons. You know, when you go in and you start talking to the person that does your nails, are they forthcoming? Do they make eye contact? Because normally a person who's being trafficked, they're going to have a hard time getting in a conversation and actually making eye contact when you start talking to them. Human trafficking always involves commercial sex. Obviously, that's not true because legal businesses that we just discussed, landscaping, construction, things of that nature, they're legal businesses. Trafficking always includes violence, which is not true. Most traffickers actually use various means such as tricking, defrauding, manipulating, or threatening the victims, not necessarily physical violence. And many are lured through, like we stated earlier, love, protection, and money. One of the other myths, only undocumented foreign nationals get trafficked in the U.S. It's not like the movies. It's not where, people are bringing a truckload of people in a trailer. And now, does that happen in vans and things of that nature? Absolutely. But it's not like the movies portray it. Persons are trafficked regardless of their citizenship status, and trafficking does not require the crossing of a border, which, like I said, has been a misconception for years. Traffickers target victims they don't know. So untrue. A lot of victims are more often trafficked by people they know who may be a partner, a spouse, or a family member. We had a female that lived in Gaston County. We could never get her to actually state that she was a victim, but the guy that her mother lived with prostituted her out. She would have to have sex with the mother's boyfriend in order to stay at the residence. That is a form of trafficking. You're coercing somebody to do something that they would not normally do. And then all commercial sex is human trafficking. All commercial sex involving a minor and commercial sex involving an adult through the use of force, fraud, or coercion is human trafficking. So, a lot of times you are running into people who, like she stated, they have to meet a quota, or they may not get their drugs. They may have to sleep outside. They may not be able to come sleep in a bed. I mean, trafficking's an ugly business, and it does take an entire community to try to combat this. So we definitely appreciate everybody that's here. So now.
$150 billion business. Another myth, like she was mentioning about the vans, that there is a myth too, that the vans are not driving around snatching people. That's just maybe like a 1%. So that is also a myth. One of the things survivors don't often identify as victims. Like she was mentioning, in that situation, a lot of times the survivors don't identify as victims. They don't see that the situation that they're in is trafficking, and that is a struggle sometimes. To where individuals just don't get it. It's to some, unfortunately, it's become a way of life to get their drugs, to have housing. It's just something that, believe it or not, that they've just been accustomed to, and just on the victim side as well as the trafficker side of this cycle of human trafficking. So, yeah, all of the things and statistics and myths that has been mentioned, and there are a lot more out there.
I wonder if we could go to a time of questions. I'm sure folks have questions or comments, and I know that we don't have another mic to share with the group that's gathered, but I'm wondering if we could have people come up to this microphone, if you're willing, just so that everybody can hear and so the live stream can also hear.
I do want to make a correction since we're on live screen. The co-founder of Hope for Justice is Natalie Grant. She's
Okay.
a country star recording artist, so it's Natalie Grant. I want to make sure I could correct that in case someone is listening.
So I hope there are questions, and if there aren't, make some up real quick. Test 1, 2. Test 1, 2. All right, thank you.
Do you have a sense for the perpetrators? Are they large organizations, or is it a lot of different people victimizing smaller groups? I don't know if that makes sense. It's probably all over the board, I'm guessing. But
I'll speak on my experience and then I'll pass the mic. From my experience, it's all of that. It's different. It could be small clusters or it could be part of a larger organization. So it could be either or. And sometimes it's gang affiliated. It could be gangs that's doing some trafficking. I've seen that where they've even been families, where the uncle, the nephew, the son, they're all part of, this network, and they're doing trafficking. It could tie into drug trafficking. The reason why sex trafficking is the second largest criminal is because criminal activity is because, unlike drug trafficking, with human trafficking, you can use a victim over and over again. Whereas with drug trafficking, you sell a drug, you use the drug, it's gone. But on average, a human trafficking victim is forced to have sex 30 to 40 times a day. So you can use an individual over and over. So to answer your question, it could be all of those things.
You actually answered their question.
I didn't know if you had anything to add.
Hi, thank you both for being here. This is very informative. We've had, unfortunately, as you mentioned, incidents of trafficking here in Davidson. At one point, I became aware of a citizen-led sting operation where some folks were trying to lure people to a hotel under the pretense that there would be underage girls there. These types of citizen stings, do they complicate prosecution of trafficking?
I would definitely say yes. Anytime that law enforcement is not, to successfully prosecute a crime, we have to document everything that we do. What can happen with a citizen-led sting like that is the citizen who is attempting to do good may get caught up in that and end up being prosecuted themselves. So anytime that you're going to, especially, when you're trying to lure, you don't know that it's not an underage person that you're actually talking to. You don't know who you're talking to. So anytime that a sting's going to be done, law enforcement definitely needs to be a part of that. And that's not to say that we would not work with citizens to attempt to do that, but we have to vet people. There's a lot of things that we have to do before we can allow a citizen to do something, because a lot of times traffickers aren't your best people. So it really isn't a safe thing for citizens to be doing on their own, because anybody that has something to lose should be threatening, or you should feel threatened by them, because you don't want to get, if they figure out what you're doing, you don't know what kind of weapons they may have on them. No, I would never suggest that anybody try to do something on their own as a citizen without the assistance of law enforcement.
Okay. And as a follow-up, what are some things that we can do that help law enforcement and help victims as well?
Well, one of the big things is if you see somebody who could potentially be a victim, report that to law enforcement. So I do have a list of signs of potential victims. So accompanied by someone who prohibits the person from speaking or answering questions and refuses privacy. So some traffickers, especially if it's a juvenile that they're trafficking, they're not going to allow that person to speak on their own. They will never possibly even not let them do things such as even go to the restroom unaccompanied, because they have to make sure that they're not going to make a statement that is incriminating on the trafficker. They appear malnourished or show signs of physical abuse or unexplained injuries. Again, a lot of these traffickers, I don't know that they're physically harming as much as mentally. Inconsistence in personal history, or they seem coached or programmed. Like I was saying, when you're talking to the person, and I keep going to a nail salon, or even a massage parlor. If you're there and, you know, you may talk to them one week, because most ladies that do go, they have their favorite person that they utilize at the nail salon. They'll ask for a particular person. Does their story change from week to week, or every 2 weeks? Do they change their stories? Do they seem excessively fearful or submissive to somebody? You know, that's not only necessarily human trafficking, but you can have that in domestic violence situations as well. And anytime that you feel that something should be reported to the police, there is absolutely no problem with calling and making a report. That's what we're here for. We're here to investigate, to try to get to the bottom of what's going on so that we can help victims. They have few or no possessions of their own. They don't have their own documents. You know, if you go somewhere and ask somebody, hey, where are you from? You know, and they say somewhere else, oh, let me see your passport. Let me see where you've been. I mean, because a lot of people, if it's legitimate, don't mind showing that. My son will sit there and hand you his passport in a half second. It's like, I've been here and here and here. Multiple hotel room keys. Because, like she said, a lot of these sex trafficking victims, they're having sex 30 times a day. And it's not always in the same place. They wear expensive clothing or accessories that were gifts. So you see a young child out on their own, and maybe you do know what their background is, but they are wearing expensive things that you know they wouldn't be able to afford. You know, there's a sign where you may need to get in touch with law enforcement and let them investigate. They mention making a lot of money in a short period of time. Well, where do you work? And this, I'm mainly talking about people under the age of 18, because there are very few multimillionaires, you know, under the age of 18. You see a child who can sit there and flash a good bit of money. Where did they get it? And they're homeless due to running away or being forced to leave home. We refer to a lot of that as couch surfing. You know, parents who, or children who they really don't have a stable environment, so they start staying with friends. Well, the friends don't always last, because their parents tend to shun that after a little while. So these kids have to have somewhere to stay.
Lack of eye contact sometime when you're talking. Citizens, parents, grandparents, church members, young people, and these phones. Monitor the phones. You know, for most of us in here, we have encyclopedias. The world right now is in the hands of these young people. So making sure you're monitoring, or have a lot of the phone companies now have where you could, you know, put a block on certain things. So just make sure and be vigilant of what young people are looking at and what they're engaging. You know, ask those questions: who you're with, where you're going. Like she said, where are you getting that money from? There have been situations where young people have been in trafficking situations and going home every day because of that force, that fraud, and that coercion piece of human trafficking. So just being vigilant is one of the big things that you can do.
Got two questions. One, fairly often, not weekly, but every year or two, somebody knocks on my door and says, "Hi, I'm selling," it's always a teenage boy, "I'm selling magazines and I need to get enough points." And Davidson has a big no soliciting law, and we don't get that here much. And I always ask them and try to engage them in conversation to figure out what's going on, and they're very hesitant. But they also show up at 9 at night when you can't call the town hall, and the police may or may not be available. I assume that's likely a labor entrapment of some kind.
It could be. It could be, and you can always call the Human Trafficking Hotline. They're available 24 hours a day, and those, from my understanding, does feed into local law enforcement. So definitely, you may ask information like, okay, find out about the organization, maybe just kind of
Well,
probe a little bit.
They don't
Like,
have any
yeah,
information
yeah.
about that. Secondly, I'm a retired high school teacher and have over 42 years had a lot of suspicious situations with various students who disappeared for a while, who came in badly bruised. If it was a family situation, because this was still then an old community where everybody knew everybody, it was kind of easy to figure out there was something going on. But we've become very urban in this community. I'm curious what kind of outreach you do with schools, and in particular with teachers, because they're the people who are going to notice symptoms with especially middle 14, 15, 16-year-olds to whom something like this might be enticing, who would be oblivious to danger, and maybe in a home situation that's something they want to escape.
Well, I can tell you, and part of the Mecklenburg County Human Trafficking Task Force, we do training to schools. And one of the organization, Present Age out of Concord, they do a lot within the schools and working with adolescents, because they focus on adolescents. Because a program like ours is 18 and older. But there are some programs that goes into the school, do training the teachers, even talking with students about prevention of human trafficking. So those are some of the things that we are doing, from looking at it from a commission standpoint in that area.
So back to the magazine sales. A lot of times, and it goes the same with a lot of the panhandlers, they'll be taken in by the van load. You also have that with shoplifting rings. They're taken in by the van load and dropped off. So when you ask to speak to somebody's supervisor in the magazine, they'd tell you probably they're up the street somewhere. That's because they have a lot of people that they're dropping off. And she mentioned the National Human Trafficking Hotline, and just so we have it on the live stream, that number is 1-888-373-7888. You can also text Be Free, which is 233-733. And then there's humantraffickinghotline.org. All of these are available 24/7. They're confidential and, of course, toll-free. And when you make a report to the National Human Trafficking Hotline, it is immediately sent to local law enforcement. So if Gaston County or Charlotte is mentioned in a tip, ICE gets it, I believe the FBI gets it, and then local law enforcement. Like in this area, I may get it. For Gaston County, I know I get it. And then I'll send it to the agency that it needs to go to, so we can make sure that somebody starts investigating. Anybody that does start investigating is asked to reply all, so we know that somebody is on it. So if you have something where you have the traveling magazine salesman, absolutely alert local law enforcement, because again, we're being educated, because 10 years ago, it was just somebody walking around selling magazines. But now we understand that that's a thriving business. And people are making a lot of money at the expense of young people.
Thanks for being here today. I appreciate the information you shared. I'm curious about the penalties for people who you are able to successfully prosecute. Are they stringent enough or significant enough that it deters them from returning to that or has an impact on the network, or do you think that they need to be made stronger?
When we can successfully prosecute, which is very hard to do. I know we have District Attorney, I believe it's West, on the Human Trafficking Commission. He is out of Fayetteville. He has successfully prosecuted a case where the trafficker got multiple years. They did a great job on that case. And I believe they are currently prosecuting a case. So what it takes is, again, it's local law enforcement getting involved and understanding what we, me included, what we are dealing with, and documenting and not treating people as suspects, but starting to treat them as victims. And again, you know, like she said earlier, having a victim actually identify as a victim is hard. It's hard. I think we're starting to make progress, but your norm is your norm. This is what I've done. They think they're making their own choices when they're not. They're being coerced. And they feel like their needs are being met, but they're not being met traditionally, like we think our needs should be met.
Yes, I was just going to add that there, you know, we talk about the case here, and that individual was convicted. There are some other cases in North Carolina, just in October of last year. I think Xavier Boston, 31, and he was connected to the incident with Fort Bragg officer, and that was trafficking. He was a Fort Bragg officer trafficking and being charged with 40 years in federal prison. So there are convictions being made in human trafficking. There are a lot more, and sometimes even victims don't want to testify. You know, I know for our organization, we're there to support and work with law enforcement, FBI, or Homeland Security, who's ever, you know, focusing on that particular case. But it's growing. We're having more people convicted, but there's still a lot more work to be done.
I have a question, or go ahead, Donna, that's fine.
I just have a comment. First of all, we have a young woman in our family who works with a program combating human trafficking. She lives in the middle of Iowa, in the middle of nowhere, so it definitely is everywhere. My question is, do you have a feel for why North Carolina is so high up on the list in this country? And I imagine Charlotte is number one because we're the biggest city in the state, but why is North Carolina? Does anybody know?
Yeah, the interstates, we access the beaches. When, like she mentioned about labor trafficking, we have a big agricultural in this area in North Carolina, but mainly the highways. In Charlotte area, we have the international airport. We have military bases, you know. So those are some of the few reasons why. I don't know if I'm missing any, but yeah, those are some of the sporting events. Here in the Concord area, it said that when they have a NASCAR event before COVID, that the population almost triples. And that's just with NASCAR events. So when you have events, money, you have people bringing in individuals for sex, and then there's also opportunities for labor trafficking when you have those events. So that makes us a hot spot.
Because to get from Florida to New York, you pass through. So we're definitely the center of all things north to south. Exactly, halfway there.
So I was wondering, just in terms of, along the lines of what more can we do? You've talked about signs to recognize trafficking, speaking up, reaching out, calling the hotline. Those are for local things that we might see. Are there things that you would recommend that we can be involved in to help? I know it's kind of overwhelming to think about the global problem, but I know there were times when people were recommending about being careful about brands that you bought from that used child labor and things like that. Do you recommend any of that, for number one? And secondly, are there other ways that our congregation can be involved in organizations like Lily Pad Haven or Hope for Justice or others in the community and that you know about, or ways that we can partner more with the human trafficking branches of the law enforcement?
As far as from a agency standpoint with Hope for Justice and Lily Pad Haven, I'm going to leave you with some information. I'm going to leave you with information that says church partnership. And it will talk about how churches can partnership with Hope for Justice. And now with Lily Pad Haven being a part of Hope for Justice, we are a global organization. So there are some great opportunities there as far as training for your congregation, how to look at some of those things like you mentioned, certain companies to be vigilant of. There's opportunities for fundraising to help survivors, and mainly just that community training and making sure that people know how to handle and look for human trafficking situations and working together so we can eradicate the human trafficking. But I'll leave this information with you all.
And from a law enforcement standpoint, a lot of what we run into is the lack of education on who to turn to. So we get somebody and we think they're a victim. Who do we reach out to? So a good relationship with your police department, and like, you know, one thing we had a victim and we didn't have a place to house immediately. We didn't know of a place to house immediately. So officers actually utilized their own money to put this person in a hotel for a night and had to stand guard, because that's the other thing that you have to do. There has to be somebody there to make sure that the trafficker does not get to the person. And then sometimes people may change their minds and try to, for lack of a better word, beat feet and get away when you're really trying to help them. And having someone supportive to talk to at that time that's not in law enforcement, that is local. You know, if you had somebody who was a psychologist or somebody who was trained to talk through, see, you have one right there. Somebody who can actually sit there and talk to a victim to let them see that, because law enforcement's scary. We're scary people. Because again, what do? We put people in jail. When actually what we want to do is assist victims in getting the help they need. Having people available to talk to victims to help them understand that too is very important. and somebody who's available right then. Because a lot of times it takes us a long time to get assets where we need them.
Yeah, that's a very good point, because there are not a lot of emergent places for victims. We're working on resolving that issue in the Charlotte area, but there's not a lot. There are a lot more victims than there are programs. So that is very important to have someone that they can have to talk with. Like, like myself, I'm a clinical social worker, but sometimes, that's good to have within your organizations, or even working with law enforcement, to be there when victims come in. So having that support, because the reality of it is, even with our program, it's for survivors who we say are ready to do the work and ready to get out of the life. And that's using the term of trafficking. It's called the life. And the reality of it is, every survivor that walks in through our doors are not ready. There are times when they come in and they may get stabilized for a while, and they're gone. They're just not ready. And we want to be mindful not to force, anyone into. It has to be their decision. But we want to let them know that we're providing the support that we hear. In reality, we are planting these seeds. Sometimes we don't see them flourish. Sometimes they go back out, and they'll come back and they'll get connected to maybe another organization. Sometimes they're getting connected to 3 and 4, if not more, organizations during their period of trafficking. But at some point, if we're just, can provide that support, let them know that that they can heal from this. They can move forward. And if we don't see it, then maybe they'll come back, or they'll connect in some other area to where they can get away from the life of human trafficking, if it's sex or labor trafficking.
Are there other questions or comments that people have? I don't know if everyone saw these or got them. We tried to put them where you couldn't miss them, but there are water bottles with the number that was mentioned, the hotline, and we really don't want to keep these. So if you know some people that you'd like to take a couple to, and give them a bottle of water, and give them, maybe carry a few in your car, and you can share them with people as you encounter them over the next week. We'd love to not be able to be, and we have extra just cards too that you can put in your wallet or give to somebody else, and we'd love for you to help us share those with folks before, so they're not just sitting in a closet here somewhere. So, do you have any closing comments before we close our program today?
Because you mentioned that, if you encounter anybody and it doesn't feel right, go with your gut. Make the call. It's worth the investigation. It's worth someone checking in. It can save a life. It can make a difference in someone's life. So if it's in your gut, if you feel it, then just make the call, so we can check it out. Thank you.
And on behalf of the North Carolina Human Trafficking Commission, thank you for holding this forum. It's very important that we are able to get the word out and to share. The Human Trafficking Commission meets every other month. We just had our meeting for June. Our next meeting will be in August. Obviously, it's a North Carolina commission, so they are open to the public. So anytime you can go to the North Carolina Human Trafficking Commission website, and we would love for you. Right now, I think we're about to go back in person in August. So we've been doing like everybody else and being on WebEx and Zoom, and it's going to be nice to be able to get back together. So, but anytime you may have a question, I am with the Gaston County Police Department. 704-866-3320. Feel free to give me a call. I'm obviously not the expert, but one thing that I have found in my 25 years in law enforcement, if I don't know the answer, I can probably find it. So please feel free to reach out anytime, and thank you again for having us.
I'm going to end the live stream in just a moment, but I just want to thank you for coming today. I'm sorry that Ms. Rutledge wasn't able to join us, and maybe we'll get another opportunity to hear from her. Thank you all for coming today. We're going to end the live stream, and I don't know, Heather, if you have anything you want to share for social justice stuff in general, or if we're just saying we'll see you next month. But anyway, thank you again, and we hope to be in touch and find out how we can continue to be a part of the solutions. So thanks again for coming, and thank you all for coming. I'm going to end our live stream, and then if you want to say anything else, go for it.